All right, we're going. Good. All right, I'm going to do one thing before we go.
I was going to see if I can share my screen. Yes, I can. Good. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to share so people can read it themselves as well.
All right, there it is. View. All right, here we go. All right,
Get
record.
ready, Dunk. This will be fun.
All right.
This will be good.
Hey, hey, everybody, Jay Weidner here. Reality check. Thanks for watching. Hit like and subscribe. Try to get up to 40,000. That's my goal for this month. Back today with Matthew James Bailey, our AI expert and person who is sort of like warning all of us about some of the things that are coming at us. And then we have Duncan Hepburn, who is, I don't know how you would describe yourself, Duncan, very young, ingenious kind of guy after my conversation with him yesterday. Kind of an expert on the human brain and neurology, I guess.
Yeah, I
And
describe myself as a neuroscientist. So
neuroscientist, right. And all right, so let's get rolling. Matthew, you asked Chat GPT a really pertinent question. So let's hear it and the answer.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jay. Let me just share my screen with everybody. And so we asked ChatGPT the following question. How does your algorithmic structure compare with a human brain? And I'll read out the answer. As an AI language model, my algorithmic structure is based on artificial neural networks, which are inspired by the structure and function of the human brain. However, there are significant differences between the algorithmic structure of an AI model like me and the structure of the human brain. One of the key differences is in the scale and complexity of the structures. Whilst the human brain has approximately 100 billion neurons and trillions of synapses that form a highly interconnected network, even the largest AI models currently only have a few billion parameters. Additionally, the human brain is highly plastic and can adapt and rewire itself in response to new experiences and learning, while AI models require extensive retraining and adjustments to improve their performance. Another difference is the way that information is processed. While both the human brain and AI models use distributed processing and parallel computation, the human brain also relies on a variety of specialized processing areas and circuits that are optimized for specific functions such as vision, language, and motor control. In contrast, AI models like me, i.e. ChatGPT, use a single network architecture that is trained to perform a wide range of tasks. Overall, while AI models like me are inspired by the structure and function of the human brain, there are significant differences in the scale and complexity and processing mechanisms between these two systems. Okay, Jay, there we are.
That's a very interesting answer from artificial intelligence. So, what did you think of that, Duncan?
yeah, I've got quite a few thoughts on that. First and foremost, I think it's really amazing that it can spit out an answer that incredible. And for
I
those of you
agree.
who haven't used Chat GPT, and Matthew, you can maybe speak to this. How long did it take it to spit out that answer?
It was instantaneous.
Yeah. So, I mean, that for me alone would take, I don't know, quite a while to actually write that well too.
Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, it does bring up some interesting points on both the differences of, how an AI model compares to the brain. But there's a couple points there that were really interesting that I'd like to touch on. One of the points is that it said that an average brain has about 100 billion neurons. We know that there's a range for that now. So on the low end, people typically have around 86 billion. On the high end, it's around 126 billion, right? And people have had even more than that. Now, interestingly enough, that's not correlated with intelligence in humans. So you can have a lot of neurons in the brain and not necessarily be any smarter or more capable or anything than somebody who's got a low amount of neurons. And specifically, we're seeing now generationally, the brain is actually getting smaller and we're actually getting less neurons in the brain, but our synapses are increasing. And as it mentioned too, the synaptic structures work very differently than AI structures. The primary difference, I believe, is through damage, right? And through adaptation. So the brain can be almost infinitely damaged and it can almost infinitely be adaptable. That's why humans can learn every skill, right? And if he can do it, therefore, I have at least the cognitive structures to be able to do it.
Yeah,
It
it's like
also
that
talks
guy that
about,
got in the accident and had half his brain was destroyed. And yet he was still had 130 IQ and was doing high math and not having any problem, even though most of his brain was gone.
yeah, and actually, I was telling Matthew about this just the other day, but there's a lot of really, really interesting studies done in children, specifically epileptic children. And what they do when the epilepsy gets really, really horrible, and this is a last-ditch effort, they can resort to removing an entire lobe of the brain, so half of the whole cortex. Now, if that happened in any of us, right, at our age, we would be phenomenally dysfunctional for the rest of our lives. Like we would be vegetative at best, in the best kind of scenario, if not death, right? Now, again, you can do that, and adults do have that happen, but I mean, with enormous penalty. Now, kids, there's lots of evidence that if that's done before the age of 10, they will fully recover. And I've seen kids like this in my clinic, and I can say from experience, if they didn't tell me, I wouldn't know. These kids play sports. They, get good grades in school. They've maybe got a little bit of a glass ceiling on some aspects, but don't we all, right? It's not anything that you really can say this caused this, if that makes sense. The other thing that I want to touch on really quickly is, the AI just said the sheer size of neuron connections. We've got over 125 trillion synapses, right? These are the connections that the brain can make. And again, we can make infinitely more from that point in time. They can rewire themselves. There's literally an infinite amount of combinations here. Just to give you the sheer size of what that looks like, that's equivalent to all the stars in 1,500 Milky Way galaxies. So think of all that information packed into our head at any moment in time. And much like the solar system, it's dynamic. It moves, it changes, new planets are made, they're created, destroyed all the time, right? AIs just don't have the ability to be that adaptable and have that amount of change, let alone just that amount of information yet.
That's remarkable. It's like we've been created in the image of the universe, maybe.
Yeah, it really is.
There's mystical traditions that actually think that.
Right.
That the universe is a giant brain.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too, because the more you study the brain, we think of it as this phenomenally complex machine. And for, good reason, it is in a lot of rights. However, in a lot of ways, it's incredibly simplistic. Matthew can attest to this. The way that I describe the brain to most of my clients is it's a muscle. This part controls that function, much like this part controls that function. And it really can be that simple at its basic building blocks.
That's amazing.
So they've pretty much mapped out the human brain now, is what you're saying.
Yeah, correct. So yes and no on that. That's a complicated answer, and I'll make it quick. We know about all the parts in the brain, and we know about generally what they do. However, there's so much information that we just don't know, that we just don't have the answers for. So, for example, stress, right? We all could be exposed to the exact same stress. I might be chilling on the beach with a margarita. Doesn't matter to me. It doesn't get to me, if that makes sense. That might cause you to be, extremely stressed, and that might cause Matthew to develop PTSD. Same brain area, same connections, same response, same everything. Why that develops differently, we don't know. And there's so many of those questions, just even in terms of why we think the way that we do, why language influences thought, all these different things, and we just simply don't have the answers for them yet.
What's interesting, Jane Duncan, is that Western civilization believes the brain is the center of intelligence. And I don't believe that's true. If you look at the Indian Vedic traditions, they would say dharma and the flow of life is intelligence. So maybe, one of the questions to ask, Dunk, is have they got it wrong, these AI kind of gurus, to say that the brain is the center of all intelligence? I don't believe that's the case.
Yeah, I agree. The brain is like an antenna, that's collecting
Right.
the information as it comes through. That's why I know AI will never be sentient, because it could never do that. But that alone is a pretty amazing thing that the human brain can do. It really is.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll agree with you, Matthew. Like, it's probably, I mean, not that they've got it wrong, but I will say there's so much that we don't know about our own brain and our own body and where consciousness and intelligence even comes from. Like, we don't have the answers for that in ourselves yet. So, there's no way for us to be able to judge AI on its
Right.
ability to do that or not.
Right. And we
But
have
is it
23
possible,
senses. Oh,
Matthew, is
go
it
ahead.
possible that the AI will speed up?
Oh, yeah. It's already doing it now. Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Moment by moment, right?
So that
Quantum.
it could start emulating the neuron experience, I guess.
Well, that's exactly what these large language models are. They're emulating, if you like, the principles of the brain, but they are nowhere near as complicated as we've seen from the answer and listening to Duncan as well. They don't have plasticity. They don't have the different ways of actually adapting. It's a multi-layer model, but really it's a single approach to, if you like, cognition, if you like, and it's very, very simple. So there is absolutely no way that on the current architecture, one, AI will ever be sentient or be conscious or have any kind of consciousness, but it can and it will achieve some kind of self-awareness, Jay. And what do I mean by that? It will be aware of its existence and aware of its surroundings, but it will be a different form of self-awareness that we understand in our humanity, I think.
And that will freak people out. That
Oh yeah.
self-awareness.
Oh yeah,
Yes, it will.
absolutely.
It's going to make
Matthew,
Absolutely.
how
people.
long? I'm curious, how long does it take for that technology to basically double in performance, though? So if we take Chat GPT now,
Sure.
how long would it take to double the capacity and to double the performance of it and that kind of stuff?
Right. So it depends what you mean by performance. I test ChatGPT and other large language models every single day, and I check in their capabilities and how they're doing. And I was speaking to Jay about this. Before Christmas, I could break ChatGPT, right? The first week of January, I couldn't break it. It had moved into such an enhanced capability from where it was just a few weeks earlier. It was just unbelievable, Duncan. Now, at the moment, ChatGPT is built on the GPT-3 engine, which has about 175 billion parameters. They're going to do a GPT-4 later this year, which is 1.5 trillion parameters. Now, while that's an increase of tenfold of the amount of parameters, I don't think we'll see a linear increase in the performance of the GPT engine, but it will be a huge leap forward, Jay and Duncan. This is where it'll be able to create movies, write your novels, it'll do everything for you, right? The age of creation will be liberated. But to your point, how long does it take? It depends on how many supercomputers are being used, but I would say that it's beyond exponential. It is just phenomenal, Jay.
I would say everything that they can put into it, they're going to put into it.
They're running out of data as well. So what we're seeing is basically they need more data for the large language models like ChatGPT. Now, Meta have announced their new equivalent to this called Llama. On Friday, they announced that. And that has a slightly different approach and it uses less data, but actually has equivalent capabilities, or so we're told. And I'll let you know because I'm going to shake it down. So there is a huge issue with the data required, Jay and Duncan, for these large language models. And so what they're trying to do is say, how can we improve the algorithmic structure so it needs less data, but still move forward with the same capabilities? But mark my words, how long does it take for a person to learn a new skill, Duncan? When it comes to ChatGPT, we're talking overnight.
Yeah. And that was
Just
the comparison.
overnight, Jay.
Yeah, I mean,
So
that's
by
where
the
I
end of
really
the
do.
year, it's going to be
Right.
like awesome beyond belief.
Right.
Well, I got in an
That's a big
argument
part of
with it yesterday on your Chat GPT, Matthew. And so I decided I would tackle a subject that I know a lot about. And I asked it, how are they able to take photographs on the surface of the moon with all the radiation? And we got in this huge argument. and I kept catching it in contradictions, and because Kodak says it never altered the film, and its final response to me was that Kodak did alter the film. So that I said, so then you're saying that Kodak lied about their film? And I said, no. Probably a spokesperson at Kodak doesn't understand what the word altered means. So at that point, I turned it off.
That's awesome.
So,
oh dear.
So I like to get back to this, the brain and why the brain is so special as opposed to AI. Now you're saying that we don't understand a lot of the brain, is what you're saying, right, Duncan?
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I think that there's a couple distinctions that, instantly kind of come to my forefront. So, obviously people have strokes, they get dementia, they have mental illnesses, things of that sort. You can put the brain under significant damage and you can still live a very functional life. You can recover from a stroke, right? And as we've seen in, the study that I talked about earlier with the epileptic children, where you take out an entire hemisphere of the brain. I mean, Matthew, what would happen if you took out half the code of ChatGPT?
Oh, it would be terrible.
It would implode, right? So, part of the brain's really uniqueness and the thing that makes it so special is its ability to adapt and change to new environments and new things. And we basically have an infinite potential for that. I mean, the brain's even got a great potential for thinking what things might be like and figuring it out before it even happens, like kind of, testing the models before we ever dip our feet in. The example that I give to this in the clinic usually is, have you ever been scuba diving? Right. And for people who haven't, I ask them, well, what's that like? And they say, well, I went snorkeling once. So, it's going to be this in the water and I might have a splash and And I say, yeah, maybe. Might be totally different. Like we actually have no idea what that's like until we experience it. You could feel safer. You could feel way more dangerous. You could feel less at the effects of the currents. You could feel more. You don't know. You've not done it, right? But our brain consistently works on actually figuring these things out, regardless of the model or the environment or anything at all. And we can even go further than that, right? Like, what does a psychedelic look like? What would our experience be like? Well, for people who haven't done it, they can figure that out. They can think, well, based on stories and based on this, it might be that and Really, like I haven't done psychedelics. I have no idea how that would be, right? None at all. And this is really where I think it's different than ChatGPT or some of these AI models. If you don't program that stuff in, or if it's so outside of the wheelhouse that there's not a direct connection, I feel as if, our current technology would make it really hard to connect those two pieces together.
Yeah, it's funny. I've known three men in my life who are really, really wealthy, right? And I mean really wealthy. And those guys, all three of them shared one thing in common, and that was this amazing ability to do future extrapolation, right? Like they could sit there and in 10 seconds figure out 15 moves down into the future of where you want to take whatever you were talking about, right? And they all possessed that ability. It was astonishing. And so they were always 10 steps ahead of everybody with this ability.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too. Like we talk about abilities and intelligence, right? And I mean, this is a question as old as time. What is intelligence? How do we measure it? Well, truly in the current psychological models, we've got hundreds of ways to measure intelligence. Humans possess them all, right? AI models don't, right? And if you measure an AI model on every form of intelligence that we have, they're going to fail some, right? So, for example, there's a holistic form of intelligence, right? And that's basically the idea that everybody has a musical intelligence and a social intelligence and a book smart intelligence and all these different parameters, right? I'm not very musically inclined, but I still do have a bit of musical intelligence, right? And this is kind of the difference between me and an AI. An AI might not have that. It might not be a skill that it's even capable of learning without hardwire.
Well, so we need to look at emulation as opposed to original thought. So you can ask ChatGPT to compose maybe a symphony, right, based on Bach or something like that, and it will probably do a really good job. but
Well,
that's not really from original thought. It's kind of an amalgamation of different aspects of its statistical algorithms in order to put something together. However, it does come up with something really quite good. So I think that ChatGPT is great at emulating these things, but is it really original thought?
Well, I guess my question for you then, Matthew, would be what's the difference? Because I mean, don't we take inspiration from Bach too?
Well, that's exactly right. And I'm asking the question. I'm not
well,
giving the answer.
I saw a somebody they told chat to write a Tupac song.
Right.
And it took about 7 minutes, and it came back,
Wow.
dude. It was really really good. I mean, the
Wow.
lyrics were amazing, and I mean, I couldn't believe it. And I mean, even had like pathos and all sorts of stuff in there. I was like, what? How can this be? I realized it was just copying Tupac's pathos, but still, it was like, wow, you know.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. This is where I think we're going, and is that I think what we're going to see is the creative aspect of the human capabilities evolve.
That's
Where
what
we
I
have where we have tools like ChatGPT, it can do stuff that we used to do, but I think we're going to go into new frontiers of creativity, Jay.
I think that a very creative person who's young, like I was when I was young, is going to take this thing and run with it like there's no tomorrow. I
Right.
mean, it's like if I had this much power at my fingertips when I was 22, it'd be like, get out of my way.
So the question is, Duncan, what might the brain look like if the creative side of our humanity actually breaks into a new frontier of creative abilities? Is that possible? Is it, what might that look like?
Yeah, good
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, great question. I'm so happy you asked. Yeah, well, I'd like to draw back to the muscle analogy. The brain is very much like a muscle, right? And like muscles in our body, they each control different functions. So again, if I want to do this, that's involved. If I want to do this, that's involved. And we have creative areas within our brain, and we also have very sensory areas within our brain that kind of work together to, evoke creativeness per se. Now we see this with everybody, right? So if we take a super talented artist now versus somebody who's not creative, his brain muscle, the creative guy, is going to be bigger, stronger, and more connected to the rest of the brain. It's going to function higher than the person that's not. This is what I do in my clinic all day. We do neurological testing and we find the weak areas, the strong muscles and the weak muscles. And that's typically where people's problems arise on the weak side, or their, kind of exceptional abilities are on the strong side. Now, much like a muscle, these areas can grow, right? So you can either do certain types of neuroplastic training, like what we do in the clinic, neurological therapy, kind of in general. Some of that can be catharsis, even if it's working with trauma, stuff of that sort. Or through direct experience, you can also gain muscle in the area. So it's much like, if I have all my nutrition in place and I've got a personal trainer and all that's good and I can grow muscle maybe faster that way. If I also go to the gym and I just dick around for a couple hours, I'm also going to, get muscle that way. That will be a slower process, but it still will be effective. So, we've seen this over, in different types of cultures and in different types of even status in our own society, right? As we've transitioned from agrarian societies to more kind of information technology societies, there are certain physiological changes in the brain that would facilitate that. The muscles that would, control kind of more IT type jobs, right? Or I don't know, doctor, high healthcare positions, things of that sort. Those are bigger, right? Whereas the, hippocampus, for example, spatial navigation, find your way around the farm just on verbal directions, those are smaller. And I mean, best example of that is if you ask my grandma, how do you get from one pasture to the other? She's got it and she knows how many steps it takes, right? Whereas Matthew, if you ask me how to get to your house and I don't have Google Maps, I'm like, I'm driving in circles for an hour, right?
You'll never find
I
Matthew's
think
house.
No.
no,
So
you
you'll
won't.
find my body a little bit later, right?
So this is, so Jay, I just thank you so much, Duncan. Jay, and Duncan, are we heading to a new human potential for the individual because that creative side of us is going to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of danger involved, and clearly, chat and all the other AIs could be used by intelligence agencies and people who want to know all about you and where you're going and what you're thinking. So there's all that kind of danger. But my God, if you could create whole worlds as an artist with this stuff, and so I'm going to say that it's going to be exponential. The advancement in the arts. I can just talk about the arts because I'm an artist. The advancement in the arts of filmmaking, animation, and all of that is going to be through the roof, through the roof. And I think you're right. It'll be before the end of the year that they'll be mature enough to actually start some of this stuff going.
I agree with you. And I think from a technology point of view and an innovation point of view, I think it'll also have an exponential impact.
Yep.
The big question will be, I think ChatGPT and AIs like that will challenge the systems of democracy and their effectiveness.
And I think it's also what we said in our last show together about when AI and AI began communicating together. Now they're going to start. Right. They're going to start examining each other, dissing each other, saying you're wrong, I'm right. You're going to see these massive AI arguments going on. It's going to be great.
Get the popcorn out. That's great.
And maybe we should put ChatGPT and others through a psychedelic experience.
That is a problem. It's impossible to give shrooms to ChatGPT. So
I'm sure someone will be thinking about this.
Yeah, well, Duncan, we were talking yesterday, and you said some interesting things about psychedelics. I thought maybe we should touch on it because you were talking about their ability to actually heal certain kinds of trauma and things. So, could you go into that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, so psychedelics can have a really profound effect on the brain. The one thing that I will say, and I have to caveat this, if they're done correctly in clinical environments, right?
Really, truly think that's really important.
Yeah, I do too. And, it's reflected in the literature as well. So when we look at studies of people who just kind of come in and they take mushrooms, for example, and they don't really know the dose and they don't really, it can have an effect. It can have consequences, right? And that's a really important point that we want to stay away from, because a lot of the psychedelic research is, I'm not going to say entirely consequence-free, but really consequence-free, which is different than most of the allopathic medicine that we have today, right? So it's positive in that light. However, again, you've got to be educated and know what you're doing and be prepared. So, for example, psilocybin, which is the active component in magic mushrooms, right? Strong psychedelic. At lower doses, we typically don't see much effectiveness for depression, for OCD, anxiety, stuff like that. They all have different doses that are based on your body weight. And I'm not going to say any of this so that you're forced to do your research and look it up on your own.
Yep, good for you.
Higher doses, we do see massive effectiveness in actually curing. And I mean curing, not just reducing OCD, depression, anxiety, things of that sort. There was a really landmark study done a couple of years ago, and they were looking at psilocybin's use for treatment-resistant depression, right? And that's an important term there, because this is therapy didn't work, brain stimulation didn't work, all the drugs didn't work, made things worse. This is really like the last stop on the bus here, right? And this is the last hope. And again, adjusted for body weight, good ceremony, everything like that, coached really well by professionals. The people in that group, after one trip, right? So about 8 hours later, right? 87% of them clinically never showed signs of depression again.
Oh, wow.
Complete remission, completely gone. And to show you the landmark of this study, think of it like cancer, right? This is a horrible thing for humans to have. Depression's a really, really nasty thing, and there's no sugarcoating that, right? Now imagine I can give you a pill and 8 hours later, you don't have cancer anymore. Right? How that would just reshape the entire industry. And this is kind of what psychedelics are doing. We see this effectiveness too for OCD, for anxiety. There hasn't been as much research on ADHD, on schizophrenia, although there is some research coming out that does suggest that some of these things can play an important part in that. But importantly too, some things that people struggle with that don't necessarily quantify as a mental illness, like fear of death, right, which can be really debilitating for terminal patients in a hospital setting. This can be a phenomenal medicine for that helps people get over that fear of death.
Yeah, and and they're legal in Colorado right now, and there's clinics forming all over Colorado to do exactly what you're saying. So
Yeah.
I highly suggest you look into it if you're depressed or chronically depressed or anything like that. I'm not saying do it, just look into it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a phenomenal thing. I think it's a phenomenal medicine, truly as it is. However, with the caveat of it's got to be in an appropriate case and scenario. And I mean, this is no different than any drug, right? Like heroin, for example, in a hospital setting is one of the most useful anesthetics that we have. It's one of the most useful pain relievers. You would not buy heroin from the street and give it to a hospital. And that's really what we're talking about here. One more important point that I wanted to talk about is just psychedelics use and the difference between our neurocognitive models on psychedelics and what AI can do, right? Psychedelics really screw with the brain, and I mean that in the most kind way, but they rewire all sorts of pathways. It really is like if you've ever seen like a cartoon video of a supernova where it just goes bam and just everything explodes and then it all comes back together at once. That's kind of like what happens in the brain, right? And again, if we take that analogy with code, you can't, shake a code up in a bag and pull it out in the same order and have that work, if that makes sense. But there's something about that in a psychedelic aspect too that also promotes healing in some way. And again, we don't necessarily know how that works. There's a lot of correlations and there's a lot of really good reasons. But in terms of strictly a neurobiological level, why creating all these new pathways and all these new synapses and destroying a lot of the other ones, how it, one, knows how to do that and does it effectively. It really does it effectively. And two, how that even works and why it did it with these pathways and not the others. And I mean, there's so many questions there that we just truly have no answers for.
Yeah, Terrence McKenna used to say that if you can get that explosive thing to happen in your brain on psychedelics, he said that's it. You've reached the pinnacle of where you want to go, and you really don't even have to make the phone call again.
Yeah. Yeah. And, on a clinical route too, there's something about, talking about an explosive, like serious kind of situation. There's something about an ego death that particularly promotes healing. And again, we don't know why, right? Some people have.
I do, because the ego is the cause, just like the Buddha said, it's the cause of all our problems.
Right.
Yeah. We wrap all of our neuroses around it and what people think of you and, oh, they don't like me. And when you take, when people outside of not me, but take a large dose of mushrooms, they realize that their ego is really nothing. And it's kind of like wearing a jacket or something. You can take it off and get rid of it. And then you're not neurotic anymore. I really think that's what it is.
Yeah.
I think that makes really good sense as we look at consciousness. And I've got a question to ask you both, actually, which I think will open a can of worms. But as we look at consciousness and move beyond identity, because identity is kind of a safety thing that people attach to, right? When we move beyond that and understand that in our consciousness there is no identity, but there still is our individuality, then I think that's an interesting place of evolution for the individual. But here's my question. There is a movement, and we've seen it all over the world, lots of research about putting AI chips in our brain.
Yeah.
Right? Now, and this is part of the transhumanist movement. And I think my view is I don't think we should invade the organic sovereignty. I think that's a wrong thing to do. But in the case of a pacemaker for the heart or for someone that has an artificial extension to their limb, where they're able to function, I think that's groovy. So the question is, what do we think about this kind of transhumanist invasion of putting AI and technology within our actual brain itself? What do you guys think of that?
Well, I don't think they need to put it in us. They have a patch you can put on you that'll do the same thing. So they're beyond invasive right now, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I would say that we kind of have to quantify like what the benefit and what actually the toll on the body would be, right? So, I don't think that anybody would disagree that a pacemaker is a bad thing. There's a form of, it's basically a pacemaker that sits on a midbrain function in the brain that can reduce Parkinson's too. And again, I don't think that anybody would suggest that that's bad or that's even
Right.
transhumanist. I mean, essentially, they're putting a small vibrator on your brainstem, is what they're doing, right? So although it's invasive, I don't really think that it's merging technology with the brain. Now, if we start thinking about, like for example, like the idea of Elon Musk's Neuralink, right, where you're kind of functioning as man and machine at once, or any amount of sci-fi movie that's kind of had that integrated, where it's actually, endogenous to your body, right? Like it's something that's a part of you now, and you're using it as if it's one of your own systems. There are so many risks on a neurological basis alone that, like for me, would make me entirely apprehensive and really scared to do that. First off, we don't know how the brain works. Like there's so much about that we just have no idea. Like the first brain scan was done 40 years ago. 40 years ago. Like we were really still in the infancy of this science. And also, we know that with extended use of brain areas, they grow. With atrophied use, they atrophy, right? So think of it like a muscle. The more I work out my muscle, the bigger it gets. The less I do, the smaller it gets, right? Now, where you kind of run into problems with actually integrating, I guess AI models with the brain. Let's say that we're just using GPS alone, right? So I'm going to put a chip in my brain and it's going to act as Google Maps. Well, that area in my brain will die if I'm relying on something else, right? And it won't be a muscle where it gets small. It'll extinguish. I mean, think of if I left my arm on a table and I didn't move it at all for 5 years. Well, I wouldn't have any function in that area at all, right? However, the difference between AI and a brain is that you can program things onto AI. If you take out that area in the brain, it's got like cascading consequences to the rest of the system. In just the GPS function alone, that's going to affect memory. It's going to give you a form of, frontotemporal dementia that's going to look like Parkinson's. It's going to affect emotional control. It's going to, it could potentially affect hearing, audition, your ability to speak. I mean, it's got just tons of cascade problems that are really serious. I mean, if we're thinking of the benefit of GPS versus the toll of losing your speech, losing your memory, losing your ability to navigate, I mean, these are really, really serious consequences, let alone the invasive surgery in the brain. That's something that's also tough.
Dang.
So this is why I say this: when I talk about AI, I talk about the transhumanist polarity, and that is a deletion of biology, which you've just confirmed. And we want biology to thrive, right? We want our brain to evolve and grow and us to have greater capabilities. And that's why I think the transhumanist agenda, to your point, Duncan, of integrating man with machine, is effectively a deletion of biology.
So I've got a question for you both then. I am sure you both are familiar with the Google effect, right? What effect do you think that that's having on our brain and biology today? And I guess specifically just, in the transhumanistic context, do you think that that's doing the same thing?
I'll let Jay go first.
I don't know. I can't. Yeah.
So Rajiv Malhotra talks about the dopamine effect and the addiction through using technology all the time, right? And the way that the current systems like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that, it's basically based on a competitive model to try and get you into the upper echelons. So you're being drawn into a kind of a reality in which you're trying to compete to get to the top, right? To be heard, right? And I think that's a false paradigm because creators aren't being rewarded, right? So in terms of where we're at the moment, Duncan, I think we're seeing plenty of warnings around reduced attention span, the disruption of sleep, and also the change in our biology to become addicted to how many likes have I got today? How many views do I have? Is someone liking me? Oh my goodness, someone's hating me, right? It's a false reality in a way. So that's my answer. I think that we're already seeing effects on human biology and mental health around this digital society. And the next step has to be really careful.
Yeah, well, thank you, Duncan, for what you just said about the potential damages to the human brain from all of this. I think that piece should be isolated almost, and everyone should be kind of forced to have to listen to that, because the transhumanists are racing down the highway without telling us about any of that.
Yeah, I think it's important. And, I think even on a smaller level than that, like speaking to Matthew's point, right? We know there's tons of studies, and Jay, I'm sorry if this gets you demonetized, but the more time you spend on Instagram, the less happy you are, right? And I mean, that's as evident now as gravity, right? It's not a theory anymore.
No, it's true. It's the leading cause of depression among young women.
Yeah, I mean, it is like in our society now. So, we do have to be careful about that. And any type of, new technology that has a significant component on the brain, we really have to think clearly on that. I do think that the transhumanist movement now is still very simplistic in the sense that it's not going to affect the brain negatively, just with the limitations of our technology. And again, deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's, the vibrator on the brainstem, is a great example. That is remarkable technology. It's so innovative. It's so futuristic, and it's a vibrator on the brainstem. So, the gap that we have to make between that and actually, AI integration, where, we're thinking of things that the AI is then, actually doing the work for us, doing the heavy lifting. I still do think we're quite a ways off of that. And even if AI technology far surpasses us on that level, our understanding of the brain is still just so infantile and archaic that has to speed up significantly. And that's not moving nearly as fast as the AI train. But I do think that there's an important point here too, in the sense, and, Matthew, maybe you can speak sooner to this, that, we're already seeing these effects without having to integrate any type of transhumanism at all, right? Like, again, as you said, this is transhumanism, right? To a certain extent, and it's having significant neurological effects. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on kind of, the boundary between adding to our life and, technology helping in just like a daily sense without having a component in our body, and the boundary between, the kind of transhumanist where it's bad.
So I do have a view on this, and I wrote about it in my book. I think the next stage in AI, when it becomes a personal digital buddy or a life buddy, for you to excel in your gifts, to thrive in life, actually takes us away from the screens, where AI is around us and following us based on our free will, and is communicating with us in a non-visual and dopamine experience. It's kind of communicating like your Alexa, and it basically puts us more at rest in our humanity, but we're still able to engage into the age of artificial intelligence. I think that's what I've written about. That's where I believe we're going. And actually, it takes us back into rest in our human experience.
So I'm a little, I like
ahead.
that, but I want to follow up. My mind initially goes to Facebook, and like in the inception of Facebook, it was just something to connect people, which is wonderful. And it's become this dopamine monster, right? Just vying for your attention, and just, and like it's really spiraled out of control, where, I think Facebook in its inception, if we studied that effect on the brain, it may not actually have that negative of an effect, maybe. I mean, there's not been a study, so we don't know, right? But, or at least not to my knowledge. Do you see that same route happening with AI, where you get, companies that are basically competing for you, and that just spirals way out of control?
I have an answer, but Jay, do you have a view on that?
No, I'm still thinking about all the dangers of sticking something into your brain.
So this plays into AI to AI communications. It plays into sovereignty. It plays into free will. So when I talk about an AI digital buddy, it is also your guardian and protector. So when it's dealing with AI to AI communications with organizations, it knows your values and your ethics, and it will only work with those that actually are aligned with that. Secondly, it knows what you're doing in your human experience, and will only bring you into that conversation and make you aware of it when you're ready and in a good place to actually have that conversation. That's called well-being of the individual. So the whole point of the age of AI is to protect the well-being of the individual. We want the organic to thrive, and our consciousness to thrive, not to be beholden to bloody machines. Excuse my French, Jay.
I agree with you. But do you
AI
think
can also watch things that are going on in your life that may be a threat, or maybe getting threatened? Like there's a whole group of cyber criminals out right now stealing people's titles to their houses. and then they actually get the title, they get the house, they actually get, and they go to the house and tell them, you got to go, I've got your house. And we don't know how to stop it, but the AI could watch that, could watch your title,
That's right.
see who's messing
That's
with
exactly
it,
right.
alert you immediately to it and all that. So I guess what Duncan, you're saying is that you like the AI, you don't want it attached to your body. So pretty much the phone is really the way to go, because at least you've got a barrier between you and the AI in some way, right?
Yeah, well, and I'll say too, it's easy to disconnect from technology in today's field. If I had it plugged into my brain, that wouldn't be as easy. We don't know that effect, right? I mean, we obviously know the more we're plugged into technology, that does have effects, as Matthew mentioned, on sleep, on happiness, on whatever. Like there is something nice about just going into nature without a phone.
Right.
And, if we have that plugged into our brain, I don't know that that would be an option or not. I will say though that like at the state that current, neural understanding and AI understanding are, I can't imagine how that integrates, right? It's almost like, what do radio waves look like? We can't even, we don't have a place for that, if that makes sense, right? So there may be a day where I change my mind and I go, this would be really useful. There obviously has been times where I've been convinced, deep brain stimulation, I'm convinced that's an amazing form of therapy.
Yeah.
I may have those moments again. However, when we're thinking about the idea of like a neural link or the sci-fi movie or something kind of that sort, right now it doesn't seem anywhere even remotely close to safe. There may be a day where it does and they figure it out and I change my mind with it. I mean, again, at some point in time, a pacemaker in your brain was a horrible idea. And now it's an amazing therapy, right?
Yeah, well, let us know when you change your mind. I want to know why.
No, you will know because I'll be able to telepath. I'll send it to your email, right?
My whole concern about that is consciousness, Jay. I've got to be honest with you, and is that Roger Penrose wrote about this. He's one of the geniuses in mathematics, and he basically, to all these folks that said, "Oh, we can upload consciousness into machines and things like this," he said, "Guys, we don't even understand quantum mechanics, right? We don't even know where to start, right?" So I love
don't
this
even
idea.
understand consciousness.
Right, there we are, right? Exactly, right? So this whole thing about where does the brain fit into consciousness? Is it that antenna you spoke about? Do we have this unified field around us that Foster Gamble and I know others speak about, Jay? I think consciousness and intelligence is far more interesting, but I think we need to protect the brain because that is the sensory kind of access into all this stuff, right?
All right, Duncan, there's all these rumors in the that there's a secret organization that's part of the secret space program, and that they can take your whole entire consciousness and put it down into a computer and then transport it across the universe and then put it back into another body. There's all these crazy rumors. Those are probably not true, wouldn't you say?
I mean, way above my pay grade. I'll put it like that. But no, I mean, I don't think we know anything enough about the brain to be able to do that. Like that's so far beyond my understanding of the technology, at least. Now there are some scary technologies out there, scary and useful, right?
Like what?
For example, there's this one that was developed probably 8 or 9 years ago now, and now it actually can work. I mean, the inception of this technology was basically to let blind people see, right? So it's an interface between, a camera, glasses, and your mind. And now actually people can see objects with it. It's black and white, it's fuzzy, but blind people can actually navigate a room with vision, right? Which is incredible, right? I mean, again, that's a therapeutic advancement that's unbelievable for humanity, right? Super infantile. Again, not entirely safe, but really cool direction where it's heading. There's another technology where we can use EEGs and MEGs alone. So it's not invasive at all whatsoever. This is the cap that has all the wires coming out of it that measures the electrical and magnetic conductivity in the brain. And essentially what they did is they put somebody in one room here watching a movie, the computer in a completely different room with a different TV, playing what it thought you were seeing, right? So its job was basically to translate the neuron connections just on electrical signals alone. It had no idea what you were watching, what you were thinking of, nothing of that sort alone. But just based on the impulses that your brain was making, it had to make a picture out of it. It's remarkable. I mean, the one guy in the room is watching a plane take off, and it's fuzzy and it looks bad. I mean, it looks almost like an oil painting or something where it's kind of more imaginary. You could definitely see a plane take off there, though, right? And I mean, this has a lot of great connotations, because we can then somewhat communicate to people who are like in a coma, for example, right?
Wow.
Which is phenomenal therapeutically. However, the other side of that is, if you put me on one of those things, you know what I'm thinking about, right? And there's no way for me to turn that off, right? So it can.
This is where Mark Zuckerberg comes in and says, "Welcome to the metaverse."
Yeah, this is where our internet connection gets shut off, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's fascinating, Jay, this whole conversation.
Me too.
Yeah, I do too. And so in the end, while AI will be self-aware, it won't be sentient. What do you think?
My view is absolutely. Duncan, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think the gap between knowledge and self-regulation and damage control and growth, like in the brain, there's this really impactful concept of post-traumatic growth, right? And the way that we, are maybe familiar with this is you get your heart broken, right? Just totally shattered. And in that moment, you decide, okay, never again. I'm changing my life. I'm going to the gym. I'm doing all that kind of stuff. It's reflected in the brain. The brain actually has more potential to grow in those moments. And there's so many intricacies like that, again, are respondent to the environment, right? So huge damage happens to us. This is what the brain does, and this is how it makes us feel. I mean, we haven't even started on the context of sensory perceptions or emotions or anything like that. I mean, that's a whole nother layer that we would have to have in order to be, truly conscious, as Matthew would say.
Yeah, and this also, Jay, plays into this control that we're seeing from the left, where their realities are really fragile. And to Duncan's point, right, we grow through pain, right? It's part of the human experience, right? It's part of it. And also we enjoy the other side of not pain, right? The benefits of growing through that pain. And it feels to me as if what they're trying to do is delete our growth, right? To try and put us into some kind of system where we're like this and we're frightened and we got to stick with this narrative. It's crazy. I saw an interview with a reporter from one of the big magazines, or big papers, daily papers out of New York, and he was on CNN and he said, "Oh, AI told me to leave my wife." And it's like, what the hell are you talking about, dude? Why are you outsourcing your sovereignty to a machine? What does a machine know about your personal inner world? If you have issues, talk to your wife, resolve them and move on. But they're frightened because, oh no, that's disinformation. It's like, dude, you're so fragile. Stop it.
Yeah, when I was about 19 and I wanted to be a writer of novels and screenplays. And I actually met a very famous writer, but I was 19 and he was maybe 60, right? And I was like so excited to be, I'm not going to say who it was, but I was like so excited to meet this guy. He's like my big hero and everything. And I said, "So I want to be a writer. What do you think I should do first?" He goes, "Pack your bags, go out into the world, get yourself knocked around, get beat up, get into dangerous situations, hitchhike, ride the freight train, be a merchant marine." He went on and on about all this stuff. And I said, "Well, why do you want me to do that?" He says, "You don't have anything in your gas tank until you do that. So you'll never be a writer." And dang, he was right. I went out in the world and took all these risks and everything and came back, far less frightened person than when I left.
Right.
Yeah, and I've seen this actually a lot in the clinic. There's a really big push now, and this is just my opinion, right? So take this with a grain of salt. But I've seen a lot of the patients, like in the last 2 or 3 years, be really, really averse from negative emotions. Like there's unpleasant ones, right? So sadness, anger, uncertainty, those kind of things. And I mean, truly, they talk about this in every religion, and the Buddhists really kind of reinforce this belief the most. Suffering's inevitable. It's going to happen. And there's no amount of therapy or money or place in the world or whatever that's going to prevent you from that. talking about post-traumatic growth in the brain, there's a concept called anti-fragile. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. And it's one of the biggest links actually to finding happiness, right? So one of the biggest follies as far as the research is concerned with being a happy person is experiencing just that emotion and seeking just that emotion, if that makes sense.
Right.
And Jay, this kind of goes on to your point of, experiencing everything in the world, right? Like there's a goal that you have and that's important, but ultimately you're becoming anti-fragile. That's how the brain works through, again, trauma, right? Like it actually grows more through stroke, through anything like that. I mean, that's the whole concept of neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. It's also how our muscles grow, right? They don't grow because we don't expose them to anything. They grow because we physically damage them, right? They become less anti-fragile. Again, as our bones break, when they grow back again, they're stronger. Scar tissue is stronger than regular tissue. Like our whole body is designed to become anti-fragile. And the pursuit of that, paradoxically, will lead you to being happier, or so the research suggests, than the pursuit of happiness, which tends to be more hedonistic, right? It tends to be more, give me a nice steak, and that's great. But, I've seen this in the clinic a couple of times, right? I had a guy that, I won't mention the name, but he won the lotto. And it was a ton of money. Like he has more money than God, just insane, right? And, he stopped coming, gave him a call, followed up. He's like, all my problems are gone. Like, I mean, come on, right? Like I'm in Bermuda, I'm sitting, sipping the martini, I'm sitting at the beach, I'm looking at my yacht. Life was good. Fair enough. Life was good for him. You know what I mean? About 60 days later, he gives me a call and he goes, okay, I've had my 60th martini and I'm bored. I'm sick of this. Like, so the hedonistic kind of pursuit of happiness is maybe good in the moment, and maybe it's a higher high in the moment, right? But it's not sustainable, right? You can't just keep doing things like that forever. I mean, even if you have more money than God, there's only so many planes and hotels and nice dinners that you can go to before it's just kind of gone. Whereas again, the happiest people, and Buddhists are like this, have dedicated practices towards something that's valuable for them.
Yeah, one of those very wealthy people that I know, I visited their house one time, fully expecting to come to a mansion, but I gave me these directions. There's this circuitous dirt road in the middle of nowhere, and I pull up, and there's this little tiny shack, and I go, "What? This guy's got like hundreds of millions of dollars." So I go up there, and there he was, and his kitchen was about 4 foot by 7 feet. He slept on foam rubber in his bedroom, which was about 6 feet by 7 feet. It just had the foam rubber on the floor. That's where he slept. He took cold showers. The bathroom was 300 yards away from his front door in the middle of the winter. He had to get up and go out there. Bathroom. I looked at him, I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "This is the only way that I can keep myself frosty," he said, which means, sharp and on edge and all that. And there's a lot of truth in what you're saying.
Yeah, like studies would show that like there's a massive gap in happiness between like somebody who makes $5,000 a year. So you don't have shelter, you don't have food all the time, healthcare is not available to you, things like that. There's a massive gap between that and somebody who makes 50 grand a year, right? So now you've got all those needs met, you got a house, maybe you don't own it, but you can go get healthcare, you're okay, you got a car, that kind of stuff. But the gap between 50 grand and 500,000 or 50 million or 500 million or whatever is increasingly marginal the more that you go up. And a lot of studies show that it kind of caps out at 120, right? Now, I will say those studies are done by researchers. Researchers don't make a ton of money, right? There is a bit of a caveat there, but yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? When we look at the things that actually do make us happy, it's social connection, totally free. Again, sun exposure, good food, right? Like, a compassionate partner. I mean, there's things that we don't necessarily need any money for, or, I mean, there's things that every human, I think, just deserves just because they're human, not because they're good or bad or otherwise. Just these are essential human experiences. And I think the more of those that we get, my personal opinion, the happier you're going to be.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you a controversial question, and then we'll probably close out. There have been consistent studies and surveys over the last 30 years where they ask, people, are you happier now than you were last year, all that. And we've seen consistently that women are completely getting more and more unhappy every year, where men is pretty much flatline. We're not getting unhappy or happy. We're kind of just in a flat line. But the depression among women is very concerning. I was wondering, do you have any thoughts on what's going on there?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of studies that have tried to tackle that problem. And I mean, there's not one meta-analysis that's done it. So I'm going to have to kind of pick and choose from a whole bunch of different spaces here. And the evidence is conflicting, because in a lot of ways, people have been getting happier, right? If you look at like overall violence in the world,
for the last 100 years, people are happier. Yes.
Yeah. And again, like a lot of that has to do with, food scarcity is lower now than it was. Water scarcity is lower now than it was. General standard of living. I mean, third world countries are not quite as sketchy anymore as they once were. Like Thailand at one point in time was, you don't want to go there. Thailand's amazing, right? Yeah. So I mean, a lot of that has to do with just economic development and just societal development. But I think that women are particularly disadvantaged when it comes to a Western society, in the sense that there's a lot of boxes that they have to check in order to be deemed valuable. This extends to men as well, but it's this concept of self-esteem versus self-compassion. And our society really promotes self-esteem. Like they really promote the billionaire, the guy that drives the sports car, the really attractive man or woman, that kind of stuff, right? The high status kind of people. The studies show that when you pursue that, I mean, you shoot yourself in the foot essentially for happiness. And the reason being is because self-esteem is closely tied to your ability to be better than somebody, or so research suggests, right? So, I mean, look at all the bikini models on Instagram. Like, what a minefield that would be, right? And like, even for men, look at all the guys driving the Bugatti and driving the whatever. It's just not realistic. And moreover, like, it's not, feasible, nor would it make you happy probably, right? So, I mean, there's a component to that. The thing is, if you are deemed less, even if you've got tons of valuable, things over here, whatever, if you view yourself as less, right, it makes you more critical of others. It makes you, less able to be vulnerable, because you can't be worse. Otherwise, you're bad, if that makes sense. And it makes you really, really scared of failing, or things that you could potentially fail on. This is why successful athletes crash and burn at the Olympics, right? When it was theirs to lose 2 days before. And, people at jobs, they just don't even want the promotion. They can't even let themselves want that promotion, because if they do, then they would, be crushed by that critical voice inside them if they didn't get it, if that makes sense. So I think that women have I think women have in kind of a societal impact a lot more of those factors working against them, because obviously, as men, it's okay to look like, I don't know, any of the billionaires. Just pick one and be a billionaire. That's a really high status guy. None of them are particularly attractive in my mind. No. Right? But as a woman, if you're not attractive, you typically aren't high status, right? I mean, there's typically a higher correlation there in terms of what you do, how you dress, the things that you enjoy, like stuff like that, If you don't have that, like those boxes checked, you're typically viewed as less attractive, right? So
less valuable.
Compound, they can be difficult.
It's a real challenge, and I think that from my point of view, and thanks ever so much, Duncan, it's great to hear all this expertise.
Really is.
I don't know what you think, Jay, but I think there's an attack on the beauty of the female and the beauty of her as a creative force in society, the nourishment and nurturing of women. And it feels to me as if there's a general attack against women, and I don't like that. I think women should be celebrated. They're incredible individuals, and we should lift them up. It's our responsibility as males to lift them up. So I don't know whether what you both think about that, but I sense there's some kind of attack against and celebrating the wonderfulness of women.
As a filmmaker, I'm always fascinated by television advertisements, because you have to get the message over really fast, and you have to use all these great techniques to get this thing done in 30 seconds or whatever. And I can tell you right now that almost every ad that has a woman in it has her doing a man's job. Auto mechanic or mountain climber. I'm not saying that women shouldn't be able to have to do all this, but you never see a woman with her child in an ad, a baby or anything like that. You never see any maternal things like that. It's always women doing men's stuff, and but you don't see men doing women's stuff in the ads. You only see the opposite. So they're definitely messing with the feminine form, I think, for sure. I don't know why. And one of the most important laws of the Hermetic science is that everything has a male and a female aspect. Everything. So you're trying to break that mold. That can't happen. That's a universal law. So
yeah, I agree. And I think too, the higher status that a woman ascends, the more objectified she can potentially be. Right. So again, super high status women, super attractive women are sex objects. Super attractive men aren't objectified in the same manner, right? And I mean, it can be, obviously I'm not a woman, but I would imagine that to be crushing, right? Because as you want to ascend the ladder, as you want to make your life better, as you also have to then accept a really horrible aspect, right? Like you have to accept that you're going to be treated more as a sex object, more as an anomaly, less as a mother, which comes with a lot of, pain. Even if you are a mother, less of a, good mother or whatever that BS actually is, men don't have that, right? Like as we ascend the ladder, we can not see our families at all. And typically it's not viewed negatively, even if objectively it is a negative thing.
That's absolutely true. There's a small, I'm one of them, so I know there's a small group of males, probably 3% of males. I don't know what the percentage is, but they will literally work 16 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. I was one of them. That's what I did in the corporate world. I started companies and you had to work your ass off, right? And there's very few women that will do that. It's just they have varied interests and they just don't want, it's just boring to have to do the same thing for 16 hours a day. So I think women are up against that group of males too in the workplace who just really bowl over everybody with their just sheer energy and exuberance for the job. And so that's a real problem too.
Yeah,
But
I
this
agree.
has
And
been a really interesting conversation, I have to say. And I'd like to have both of you back because I have a feeling this is going to be a sneak hit. I think people are really actually really interested in the brain and how it functions. I know I am. And like you said, we're only a little tiny bit of the way into our understanding of what's really going on inside the skull here. And I'd like to bring you back and talk about psychedelics too, because I used to be an advocate of psychedelics. I am no longer an advocate for the public use of psychedelics. I've come out completely against it. I'm advocating for what you are advocating, Duncan, which is a responsible way to do it because I've seen too many casualties. I do not want to be karmically responsible for damaged people. And I've seen too many people take dimethyltryptamine and ayahuasca and have serious psychotic experiences. And I just, you don't sit there and listen to Ozzy Osbourne while you're on, dimethyltryptamine. It's just not going to work. So I don't know. Anyway, thank you guys, both of you, for coming on Reality Check.
Thanks, Jay. Been great.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
All
Duncan.
right, hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. I'm Jay Weidner. Hit like and subscribe. Help me hit 40,000 subs. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And we'll see you soon next week, maybe, I guess.